Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a Patreon replay. This is actually from Isham Gamer in the Algérie, which is maybe a little overlooked in game, but the actual Algérie, which was a one-off, was, at least according to Drachinifel, and you know, I kind of respect his opinion, it was the best engineered treaty-compliant cruiser of the era, or heavy cruiser I should say. And it basically maxed out the 10,000 ton limit, but managed to do quite a lot of very clever things in the process. And considering that France's earlier attempts at heavy cruisers had been less than stellar, it was quite a remarkable improvement. But like I say, it was a one-off. It didn't really get to do much during the war, and eventually was scuttled at Toulon when the Nazis tried to seize the Vichy French fleet. So it's more interesting in its design than its service, but in game it's still a pretty decent tier 7 heavy cruiser. You've got a good range, you've got 8-inch guns with a pretty decent reload, you've got a speed boost, you've got hydro, it's got okay armour for a tier 7 cruiser, and it's just all round a decent ship. It doesn't really stand out as being spectacularly good in any one regard, but maybe that is something that is quite true to life, I suppose. Like, the actual ship itself was more remarkable for what they managed to do within those treaty limits. There were other treaty designs that were quite good, but you know, some of them weren't really adhering to the actual treaty limits, and others like the county class were, as Drac says, suspiciously easily up-armoured later on, almost as if they had been designed with that in mind. So yeah, it's not like the Royal Navy was not doing their own things to try and work around the various treaty limits that were in place, but they just weren't quite outright ignoring them in the same way as the Italians, the Japanese, and the Germans. So this is a top tier game. No submarines, no carriers, so that's generally a happy time for all involved. It's also a standard game, which is maybe less of a happy time. It certainly is when I'm playing, but yeah, it's not a bad ship to be top tier in. It's certainly got it's got the range to bully lower tier ships, definitely, and the armour is decent enough. I mean, okay, if you get caught broadside it's going to hurt, but that's true for basically almost every cruiser in the game. But at the moment he's well taking advantage of the fact that this Andrea Doria is basically taking all of the attention from these enemy ships and just trying to get some HE and, if possible, fire damage done as well. So it's a bit of a slow start, this one. It's nothing special, but given that this is a standard game, those can sometimes, in fact quite often, heat up towards the end quite a bit when one side or the other makes a play towards the cap circle. And as we can see, the other flank, well, there's something a bit weird going on. They're sort of not quite all in the middle, but they're all on the 7-8 line, so they're sort of to the side of that middle area, and they're actually being flanked by enemy ships coming up the 9-10 line, and even through the little gap in the islands there's a bit of action going on. So that's a slightly unusual sight. I don't really often see a team, in this case Isham's team, just completely ignoring that line and instead going on the 8 line. And we even have the top tier battleship on this team, the Nelson, who's decided they've gone down that far. In fact, we might as well just go to the cap rather than try and actually fight things and take advantage of that position. It's a slightly odd choice. It's not what I would have done. So there's his first kill. Not a huge amount of damage so far, but he has just been peppering these HE shots at things and basically trying not to get focused, which is kind of key in cruiser gameplay. If you want to certainly survive in cruisers in the mid tiers and I mean, really, it's a good habit to take up through the high tiers as well. Although there are better armoured cruisers in the high tiers that allow you to play more aggressively. But certainly in the mid tiers, there are lots of very squashy cruisers, and you have to try your best to not be focused, to make yourself an annoying to hit target. And the speed boost can come in very, very useful, in particular for French cruisers. So he's already used one, and he's got about a minute before the next one goes down. But yeah, he's not sticking around in his former position. He's actually pulling back a bit. But he's also, I think, at this point noticed that, oh yeah, our cap's being flipped, which is probably that destroyer, that enemy destroyer that came up the 9 line, and has done the same thing as the Nelson, only it's a slightly more sensible decision in a destroyer rather than an easily spottable battleship, which is just going to get reset over and over, which is exactly what's happening to the Nelson. So he kind of really has to go and deal with this. There is the Mayhan coming back as well, and this Viribus unit is within firing range, but they don't seem super interested in turning around. And there we go, he actually gets a line of sight there. I think from the Mayhan, it's hard to judge exactly, but I think the Mayhan just surface spotted this guy, and the Akatsuki then just started firing. And the Akatsuki, it's not the fastest rate of fire. I mean, versus the Mayhan, the only real advantage is the floaty US shells, but given the Mayhan is closing the distance, that's going to be less and less of a factor all the time. And then, of course, there's Isham firing his shells in from the side, and he possibly could have used the reload booster here, actually. I mean, ideally you want to be using your full broadside guns when you have the reload booster going, but for a small tricksy target like this, and given that it is focusing on battering the Mayhan, yeah, I think the extra little burst of DPM could have been quite useful, and potentially that Akatsuki could be dead already, but they're not going to last too much longer. They'd smoked up, but just kind of drifted out their smoke screen, at which point they were surface spotted. So they didn't really come to the cap circle with a good getaway plan, and that's a mistake in a destroyer. If you're going to try something like that, there's rarely any point about trying to fight it out against half of an enemy team that's suddenly coming back to defend their cap. It's just not going to work very well, and at that point you want to kind of use your sneakiness and your speed to run away, but the Akatsuki didn't and is now sunk, and that's the last enemy destroyer. So in fact there weren't many enemy destroyers to begin with, so that's the last big threat to their cap gone. Meanwhile the Nelson's still valiantly sailing around in the enemy cap. It's occupying a couple of enemy ships' attention at least. Also there's a little, there was I don't know why, a question very early on about Robert Ballard and the wreck of the Bismarck, and then for some reason somebody went and, I don't know, looked it up on Wikipedia and copy pasted the first couple of lines into the in-game chat, and I don't know why somebody was prompted to just randomly ask about who discovered the wreck of the Bismarck at the beginning of this game, but there you go. If you ever wanted to know without looking it up yourself, you can watch this video to find the answer instead, I guess. Or just randomly ask in a game of World of Warships, and somebody will get annoyed enough to go look it up. So despite the weirdness on the 8, 9, 10 line, they're actually kind of winning. There was a potential for the enemy team to basically sort of surround that group and sort of pummel them from both sides, but it didn't really work out that way. And the Nelson, who is still alive and must have absorbed a fair amount of damage at this point. I mean, they've not necessarily done much that's useful in terms of dealing damage or getting kills, but as a distraction, I guess they have done something. And there we go, they actually got torpedoed by an emerald that they were unable to sink. It was the Mayhan that got down there and sank the emeralds. They must have done some damage to the emerald, but yeah. The other two remaining enemy ships are on this flank, and they are both pretty healthy. This is, I think, also part of the failure of the enemy team to win. I mean, yes, they killed half of Isham's team, but they didn't really have the ability, the capability to properly push this flank. And the fact that the last two here are some very healthy looking battleships means that they weren't really trying, at least this pair, and one of them was the enemy top tier battleship, although they do have some kills, so they've done some damage. It's just they weren't trying to push or like reposition for advantage, I guess. So they're now just sort of sailing towards their doom. So our first use of the reload booster there, trying some AP against the broadside of the Nagato, which doesn't have the best armour, at least not in comparison to the Margi, which has very, very good, quite trollish armour in comparison. And yeah, he doesn't really want to get hit by those 16-inch guns, but if you can keep having a broadside to shoot at, that would be quite nice. And not run aground as well, that will be even nicer. But yeah, they've been concentrating on other things, so the New Orleans has just gone down. And that Nagato actually is going to eat some of his torpedoes. The torpedoes have a decent range. He's definitely, I think Isham's a little paranoid about not running around at this point, but also trying not to show too much broadside, and actually does take a very heavy hit there from that Russian battleship, but does at the same time get the torpedoes into the Nagato, who is now flooding. So we're closing in on 100k damage, and there we go, the flooding actually finishes them off. So another incoming salvo, but that misses, and well, somebody else gets the kill, the Mutsu, which is actually a pretty good ship. I rather like the Mutsu. It's one of the more fun and interesting tier 6 premiums. Not as good as Warspite, but you know, Warspite is Warspite. But Mutsu's pretty good as well. So yeah, all that's left is this Asturias, and well, will he get the kill is the question. He's denied the Kraken because he wasn't able to kill the battleship, and then doesn't get that kill either. But still a bit more damage, so just shy of 100,000 damage, which is not too bad at all. So second place on the team, the Mutsu actually first place, the Nelson somehow third place. So they did do some damage, they just didn't manage to kill anything. And then the Viribus in fourth place, which is not that easy. The Viribus does not have a lot of survivability. So there you go. It was mostly shell damage, a majority of it anyway, and then 30k from the torpedoes, and then a little bit of fire damage on top. So yeah, the torpedoes provided a nice top up to his overall damage there. So yeah, Algérie, it's pretty solid, and although it, like I said, it doesn't do any one thing spectacularly well, it's a very good all-rounder. And for a tier 7 cruiser, it certainly does have a very good range, and the firepower is decent as well. You know, like I said, it's not amazing, but with that reload booster, you can occasionally kick out some very, very nasty salvos indeed. So that's it for this replay. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.